So welcome everyone. My name is Kathy Markov and I'm happy to be here today with you presenting on behalf of the Santa Barbara County America's Job Center of California. This presentation is going to be recorded. It is being recorded and it will be saved to the YouTube channel for the Santa Barbara County America's Job Center of California. So I'm pleased that you are here. We have an interesting topic. We're going to be talking about thriving in the post-COVID workplace. And so I want to share with you that we developed this title about a month ago. And usually I don't kind of reveal the time frame. We like to make these workshops what we call evergreen so that you could look at it at any time. But this one is sort of grounded in where we are historically. So in early July 2021, we were feeling like in the United States, we were moving out of COVID, moving to a different phase. Today is August 5th, 2021, and we have a variant, the Delta variant, which is resurging throughout our community here in the Central Coast of California and throughout the nation. And I shouldn't have put post in quotes, right? Because and I did not want to cancel because in fact, we do have some things to share about what we are calling in quotes, the new normal at work. So a lot of people are talking about getting back to normal. And what I want to share with you is that really there is no normal anymore. There's been a lot of things that the pandemic has brought to light. I want to share some very positive things, right? And there are some things that we need to understand about the workplace. If you're a current employee, particularly if you're a job seeker in terms of the life cycle or particularly the hiring process, onboarding and integrating into a workplace in this period. But one of the things I want to share is I have a business where I do management, leadership, training, and coaching in medium-sized businesses up and down the Central Coast of California. The average size of the companies I work with, I don't know, 30, 40 employees. They're employers that have enough employees that it's worth bringing in someone to do some customized training and coaching. I have employees that are customers that have 800 employees, some that have 15, but I'm not talking about teeny tiny little employer workplaces. And what I'm happy to say is all of my employers, all my workplaces are still going. They either pivoted into a line of business that was recession proof, or they found that they were essential workers and they've been thriving during this period. So although we want to say this, that 2020 was brought to us by the letters WTF, in fact, you know what? Some people actually didn't think that 2020 was so horrible. Of course, everybody's devastated by the pandemic, but there were a lot of gifts and lessons to learn from this experience that are applicable to the workplace. So as Californians have been coming back to work from maybe a period of remote work or not spending as much time in the office and finally able to have gatherings and trainings, this is an activity that I've been doing with a lot of my clients. And I ask people these things to consider. What have you gained in the time of COVID? What will you get back post-COVID? Oops, there again, we've got a little problem. What have you lost in the time of COVID and what will you lose post-COVID? Now, this is a very interesting activity to do because we get a variety of perspectives. Again, as I said, some people think that 2020 was one of their best years of their life. And the perspective of some unemployed people may be very different than those that were employed. But the variety of things I'm seeing is that some people loved the time with their families. And this isn't just time with small children. Lots of people had a lot of quality time with their parents, their grandparents. A lot of people had multi-generational households, people who never thought that they would move back in with their parents or have their parents move back with them. The situation of the pandemic caused that, and many people had a very good experience with that. Other people really struggled with having their kids, particularly those that had small school-age children, first, second, third graders at home. This was a very challenging time for them. Some people suffered great financial hardship. Others reported that their savings accounts have never looked so great, or that they paid off all their debt during this period, not realizing that they were spending so much money on going out and shopping, and have decided to change some of their habits, and that their financial outlook is much stronger. Some people really suffered from the isolation. And we know that there have been an increase in mental health concerns in general, but also in the workplace. Other people reported they just loved being home alone. They loved that they didn't need to have excuses for not wanting to go out and socialize on the weekend because they couldn't. And now with things opening up, they're finding it again, having to maybe get pulled into social situations that they'd rather just be home watching Netflix or reading a book. So very interesting. And asking these kinds of questions are very important for two reasons. One, for us to have the opportunity to be clear on what are the things that we actually got out of this situation, what we learn about ourselves. You know, for me, I started a lot of new hobbies and activities that I love to do, but didn't have or make the time for in my busy professional life. I was at home more. And so I started drawing again, making jewelry, doing artistic things, which I love. I don't want to lose that, right? So being conscious of that. Also, just gaining empathy for other people in the sense that we cannot assume that, first of all, it was a total terrible year for everybody, or that our experiences with the pandemic are the same as everyone. There is one thing, though, that is for sure, that this pandemic had a big impact on the state of our labor market. So we know that a lot of people were unemployed or displaced or left work as a result of a variety of different reasons. And that despite things getting a little better and despite a record number of job openings, that employers, all employers, are desperate for talent at this moment. So again, in August of 2021, some employers are so desperate for talent that pretty much anyone with a pulse can get a job. This situation will not last. If you are watching this and you are unemployed, now is the time to get a job, because it is what we call an employees or job seekers market. There are so many opportunities out there, and employers are willing to take people who may not be fully qualified for a position and bring them up to speed, because again, with a market supply and demand, the supply of jobs is greater than the number of people that are trying to get those than the demand. Or you can turn it around. The demand for employees is greater than the supply of people that are willing to take work. So what I want to do is sort of walk us through the life cycle of an employee from job seeking to hiring, and kind of share some of the impacts of COVID that we know of now, and kind of end with some of the things that are evolving in terms of what the workplace is looking like when we finally get to a point where we're not dealing with all the gyrations of this pandemic. So, current job seeking environment, there's no return to the way things were before. So we'll talk more about that, but the workplace is looking very different. And certainly recruiting is looking very different. Computer skills are absolutely necessary. And I'll talk about this later, but you may be competing with people from all over the country or even all over the world for some types of jobs. So I know in my experience working on the ground, in workforce services, there are some people who are reluctant really to embrace the use of computer skills. Now I'm talking 10 years ago, but I know some of these people still exist. Maybe if people have been more customer facing and well, even so, but maybe in more of the trades, reluctance to use computer skills, but computer skills are here to stay. They have been for the last 30 years, and they're just being used more and more in workplaces. And for the recruiting process, organizations have realized the benefit of doing all kinds of paperwork and recruiting using computer skills. So it's essential that all of us focus on keeping our computer skills current. And when I say that, I mean that. I was never formally trained, say, in Microsoft Office. I learned what I needed to do my job. But when I left that job to go into private practice, I realized I needed to learn more computer skills in order to compete and succeed with what was happening. During the pandemic, I used that time to really upskill my computer knowledge and use of applications. And I'm actually now hired by some training firms to manage the back end of remote meetings on Zoom, Adobe Connect, those types of applications. And the reason why I tell you that story is that these kinds of skills, what we call productivity applications, it's not, using your phone, it's work-related computer applications, mostly Microsoft Word, Google software. These things are being used more and more. And one of the things that happened in the pandemic, people who were working, their use of productivity software by necessity increased. And there's no going back from that. So embracing computer skills and being a continuous learner and upskilling, scaling your skills of your use of computer technology for work purposes is essential for success going forward. The good news is anything you want to learn, there's a YouTube video on it, right? But it's really important. The other thing about the current job market is that it is a job seekers market, as I mentioned before. And this, we don't know. No one has a crystal ball, but employers are asking and workforce professionals are wondering, and you can see a myriad of pundits on television talking about the job market. Why is it that job seekers are not going back to work when there are so many job opportunities? And we don't know how it is going to end. So some of the conversation is that it's related to extended unemployment benefits, which if you're a job seeker and you're getting them, you need to know they will end, and it will not be a subtle end, they will just end. And at that time, everybody who needs to work will be rushing for those jobs. And this job market could flip the supply and demand very quickly from being a job seekers market to an employer's market, meaning that employers are getting thousands of applications, and for a job that just requires a bachelor's degree could hire someone with a PhD, right? I've lived through those kind of markets. It's equally challenging, but I know as an employer during those periods, I was able to get talent that I could never attract prior. That is the opposite of what's happening now. If you're a job seeker, now is the time to get a job because the jobs are available and you may be able to get into a job that you're not qualified for yet. Once you're hired, they're not going to let you go when the job market flips. You're in. And then you work to prove yourself and to keep the job. That's another workshop that I did. But now is the time to secure a job. So again, there's no crystal ball. So it could be the end of extended unemployment benefits, or it could be related to childcare. And we were thinking schools were going to open up. That's still the plan, but we don't know what's happening in the pandemic. If schools are able to open up and stay open, there will be job seekers running back into the market quite quickly. So if you're a job seeker, now is the time to get that next job. So this is the climate. You know, there are job postings, and again, I've mentioned the labor market. The labor market is really the foundation of what you see in the job postings. And I want to talk about that a little bit. It is important for all job seekers to educate yourself about the local labor market. There are new opportunities that are existing, and things you may have never thought about your jobs that you could take, but you have to be informed. So this is really important. So there are certain industries in every region that are growth industries, and you want to know what they are. If you're a job seeker that was impacted by any kind of recessionary impact, whether it was the recession 10 years ago or the COVID recession, you want to make sure that you enter into a field, an industry that has a solid foundation to it, that is a growing industry. And the workforce development boards in all communities that are throughout the United States have done research on these things. And they have funds to help people get training, vocational training for the industries that are strong in that particular area. Now, having mentioned that, the time for formal vocational and education, unfortunately, may have passed. You know, I've been saying that message for ever since, well, for always. When you first get unemployed and go on unemployment, that's the time to sign up for training. A lot of people are optimistic. Oh, this won't last very long. I'm going to get another job. I'm going to go back into what I was doing before. That may not be the right path, because if you lost your job during a weakening economy, that shows weakness in that particular industry and in that particular job. And it may be time to upskill and change and get into something that has a stronger foundation. So I don't mean to be, a bringer of bad news, but I hope that the time has not passed for formal education, because now is really the time to get hired. But in today's work environment, we all have to consider ourselves as lifelong learners and find a job that will provide you with on-the-job training and a career pathway for advancement and increases in earning potential. So this is very important to consider. The job that you're taking, is there a pathway that leads you somewhere? So, for example, in the medical field, I helped people get certified as phlebotomists. And then within 5 years, while working and going to school, I know people who became registered nurses. That's a pathway. You move from a lower level position and on the job experience plus formal training outside of work, often sometimes paid by the employer. You can move your way up, right? There are industries that have that kind of career pathway. And this is very important for you to consider, particularly as we're on the Central Coast of California. Many jobs are in retail, hospitality, tourism, agriculture, service industry, often industries without a career pathway. And so if that is your situation, it's time to get informed about the labor market and understand where the growth industries are. Now, I'm going to do sort of a very brief overview based on work that was done by the Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo workforce development boards on the labor market, but know that these are research that is projecting what's happening in the future, and nobody has a crystal ball, and this is information that changes. But there are some things that we can say about work here in the Central Coast of California. What I would advise you to do is really get in touch with the labor market tools available to you, particularly through the Employment Development Department. And I know that the Santa Barbara Workforce Development Board, America's Job Center California, on their YouTube channel, have some workshops by experts on labor market that go into more detail than I have the skill to do. But I'm going to share with you what the Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo Workforce Development Boards have found in the industries that they're focusing in on in terms of growth. So the lowest average earnings per worker, right? We want to really know what those are. No surprise, retail, tourism, hospitality, recreation, agriculture and food, all kinds of services, right? Average earnings between $30,000 and $50,000 a year. Well, we live in one of the most expensive markets, particularly in housing. So the cost of living here is very high, very difficult to make ends meet on these kind of wages. And some people, maybe they, they don't have any higher education or certifications related to their job skills. This is why I focus on getting yourself prepared. These kinds of employers are really looking for people right now, desperate for people right now. There aren't a lot of career pathways. So if you're listening to this, I know that you're interested in advancing your career. So let's look at some higher level career opportunities. So mid-level average earnings per worker. These are the professions that can earn you between $65,000 and $73,000 a year. Now we're in a head of household level job. This does not mean that you will be, going on elaborate vacations and buying a vacation home, but this salary range in the Central Coast of California is considered head of household. So this is information and communication, professional and business services, building and design. Again, may not be the manual labor. You might be a supervisor on a construction site, or more in the design phase of it. Healthcare, right? You start in healthcare, well paid. Manufacturing, a lot of people don't think about that, but people on a manufacturing line, some very skilled, using fine motor skills. I have customers in the engineering field where they know nobody knows how to do what they need you to do. They will hire you at $30 an hour if you pass some tests, like on your fine motor skills. If you can learn it, you have the eyesight, you can make good money, you learn on the job. A lot of people don't think about that. You don't need any education because there's no one who can train you to do that. It has more to do with your eyesight, your fine motor skills. And there are some great job opportunities. There's a lot of specialty manufacturing that happens as a result of us having UCSB and Cal Poly, two major engineering architectural universities in the not only the nation, but in the world, producing entrepreneurs who are wanting to stay in the area and manufacture their products here, and they need help. Education and knowledge creation, logistics. So there's some training, some of it, again, might be on the job, but these may be areas you hadn't thought of before that could get you a head of household job. Here are the highest earning professions in the area, probably not surprising to people. IT, so information, communication, technology at the higher level, right? Running an IT department, that kind of thing, public service and infrastructure. Now, this may be a career pathway. Work for the state, work for the federal government, work for the county, work for the municipality, 4 different sort of levels of government, from the federal government down to the city level. And in there are great opportunities to get in. I know the counties do extensive training of their employees. Social services, for example, 6 months of training before you actually start doing the trade. It's almost unheard of. Very few, if any, private employers, certainly not in this area, maybe large global corporations could afford to train people for that length of time. But once you get in, you might start at the bottom, but there's a pathway to move up. So think about public service. You'd be surprised at the higher levels, the kind of salaries you might make. Biotech, biomedical devices. Again, this could even move into manufacturing of biotech kinds of things. There's money there. Financial, insurance, banking, real estate. Some of this may involve being a solopreneur, being a real estate agent, for example. You cannot expect or assume that you'll right away make a lot of money, or that you will even like it and that you'll be good at it. But if you are, great opportunities here in the Central Coast of California. Defense, aerospace, transportation, manufacturing. We have Vandenberg Air Force Base. We have in San Luis Obispo County, we have Camp Roberts. Camp Roberts is a little off the radar, but there's lots of job opportunities at Camp Roberts and also at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and a lot of smaller consulting, contracting opportunities. You could hook in with some of that, and the pay tends to be quite good. So workers in these areas make between $90,000 and $138,000. Something to consider, right? So preparation and getting ready and looking for where the opportunities are and opening yourself up for things you hadn't considered, right? Things you hadn't considered. Going into aerospace or defense or going into manufacturing may not have been something that you thought about, but may provide you with some more opportunities and some more stability in your employment longevity without having to be laid off every time there's a recession. Okay, so you're ready to apply for work. Let's talk about the recruitment process. During the time of COVID, there are some very important things for us to understand. We are going to talk about vaccinations in this. So the first thing that's important to understand, it's illegal for your employer to ask you about your vaccination status during hiring, because COVID vaccination status or anything related to COVID or related in any way to your health is a protected conversation. It's protected by HIPAA, and it needs to remain confidential. And during the hiring process, and some smaller employers don't know this, if someone asks you your vaccination status, I wouldn't be like, that's illegal. But it is important for you to know that really they should not be asking you about your vaccination status during hiring, but they can ask you about it once you're offered a position and or once you're employed by them. So it's important to kind of understand these rules. I think employers didn't really know how to handle COVID. At first, there were a lot of open conversations, particularly when the vaccines came out. Who's vaccinated? Who's not vaccinated? Open meetings. And then it became very clear, this is a protected conversation, confidential conversation about somebody's health. And we'll talk in detail about that. The best practice is really not to discuss about vaccinations until you're offered the position in most situations, and I'll get to that in a minute. You have the right to ask for what we call a reasonable accommodation if you have a legitimate documentable reason for not getting vaccinated. Let's talk about onboarding. In onboarding, you want to prepare for a virtual onboarding using your computer skills, right? This has been one of the things that I think is going to stick after COVID. Virtual onboarding just makes a lot of sense for employers of all sizes. You may not physically meet your boss or your coworkers, and I'm seeing this over and over again. People have been hired for 6 or 8 months, never been face-to-face with their boss or coworkers. Sets up some interesting dynamics. If you're customer facing, be prepared for a variety of opinions about masks, vaccines, company policies. And what I will say, this is very difficult for employers, and you need to respect and comply with the messaging that you're getting from your employer, even if it changes, because we're on what is called, a roller coaster, a corona coaster. Up and down, up and down. Things are very different. So I want to share with you some recent headlines and make it clear. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission said that employers can mandate COVID-19 vaccines. It's illegal to mandate vaccines. The employer, yes, your employer can require you to be vaccinated or lose your position. This is from a very prominent employment attorney in the area that the California directs state employees and healthcare workers to report vaccination status and adds new masking and testing requirements. And we're going to see more and more of that. Look, this is very recent. Americans suffer pandemic whiplash as leaders struggle with the changing virus. This is a very challenging time for all employers. And this is, as of this morning, after months of avoiding the vaccine issue, companies begin to mandate. So federal governments, state governments, Walmart, Google, Netflix, Disney, Tyson's, they all require vaccinations as of this morning in the New York Times, right? Small employers were waiting for larger employers to do this because there will be legal challenges. And your small company here in Santa Barbara that has 40, 50 employees could not weather and sustain their business with a big lawsuit to question whether or not this is legal. The fact that the federal government and state governments are mandating it gives these other private corporations some precedent to be able to do it. And I can tell you right now that legally companies are finding that they are likely on solid ground if they mandate vaccines, and it is coming to our small employers here in the Central Coast. So I just want to, I don't want to be controversial, but I do want to recognize that there are people who really are against vaccines for a variety of reasons. It's important to understand that the Delta variant has kind of been a bit of a game changer. So a lot of employers, in my experience, and I've been right on the front lines with them, being educated by labor law attorneys in the local area about how to handle this. It's been a little bit kind of don't ask, don't tell, let's just be respectful of everyone. But the Delta variant has really changed it. And this is a quote that says, if you're vaccinated, you've done the most important thing for you and your family and friends to keep everyone safe. This is by Greg Gonzalez, the assistant professor of epidemiology at Yale. He says there's substantially more freedom for people who are vaccinated, but the idea that everything is the same as the summer of 2019 is not the case. And that's the truth in life, but also in the workplace. So if you choose not to get vaccinated, the truth is that your employer has a legal right to ask you about it and to engage in what is called the interactive conversation to determine if they can make what is called a reasonable accommodation for you or not. So what's happening is this novel coronavirus pandemic, no one had ever dealt with it. We thought it was something different. It is migrating itself into the norms that have been created for any kind of health issue or any kind of what again is called a reasonable accommodation that people would ask for. So what is a reasonable accommodation? Your employer says we mandate vaccines. You, for whatever reason, don't want to get it. Your employer asks you why you have not demonstrated, or told them confidentially, it should all be confidential, that you're vaccinated or not. And you want a reasonable accommodation. A reasonable accommodation is a modification or adjustment to a job or the work environment that will enable a qualified applicant or employee with a disability or a health issue to participate, or also, some kind of religious reason to participate in the application process or to perform essential job duty functions without causing or incurring undue hardship to the operation of the employer's business. So, there have been cases of people who say, well, I'm not getting the vaccination and I want to come back into the workplace. And employers have had to come back to them and said, well, if you're not vaccinated, then you need to remain working remotely. And actually, the employer has a right to say that, right? As long as they engage in an interactive conversation, they get to decide if they want to accommodate what you're asking or not. And this is important to understand. The granting the reasonable accommodation of being able to continue your work as it always has been without a vaccine, if they mandate vaccines, and not all employers will, but some will. This is at the employer's discretion, and it's important to understand that there's precedents about this. Again, remember, employers have the legal right to mandate vaccines. I believe that it's coming, so that they may say that you cannot work in their company without a vaccine. If you're not vaccinated and do not intend to get vaccinated, it's important that you're prepared to have a confidential conversation with your employer about it if they ask, and to be prepared to justify your reasoning. Now, labor law attorneys are telling employers to have these confidential conversations and to track who's vaccinated and who's not vaccinated, whether or not they mandate vaccines. So most employers are going to have this conversation with you. Reasons an employee could be exempt could include some very strongly and specifically held religious beliefs, or a disability or a specific medical issue. Your employer could ask you for documentation. Now, it's interesting, I was trying to do a search on what medical conditions would keep you from getting a COVID vaccine, and I did not get a list of specific things. But they even said, like, if you have HIV, you can get the vaccination. If you are pregnant, you can get the vaccination. It would be very specific, and your employer could ask for documentation from your doctor. So this interactive conversation is designed to sort out on an individual basis what's going on and to provide an accommodation for you so that you can still work and meet the employer's need for the work that you're providing. This is an arduous task. It takes time. And I'm going to tell you, honestly, from an HR point of view, it might not be really appreciated from your employer unless, you really have specific reasons. So you have the right to ask for reasonable accommodation, and your employer has the right to deny it. So if your reason is political or ideological, this may not be acceptable to your employer. If it's for religious reasons, be prepared to be specific. Exactly what religious beliefs or doctrines state that vaccines are not allowed? Is there a precedence in your religion for that? I mean, there are some religions that have always been against medical intervention. Okay. But not just because your pastor decides that they're against this particular vaccine. That's going to be more difficult. So these are very difficult conversations in a very difficult time for employers, and many are challenged with how to proceed in this ever-changing situation. My advice to you is be professional, be respectful. So a person familiar with Disney's decision to mandate vaccinations said, the company has probably done a calculation and decided that some people will unfortunately quit rather than protect themselves, and so be it. So there is that attitude out there. If you're not going to get vaccinated, so what? But not all employers, right? So this is important. Having said that, since employers cannot ask about your vaccination status prior to hiring, remember the recruitment and hiring process is interactive. You also get to ask questions of your employer, your future employer. If they can't bring it up, you can. If you feel really strongly about not getting a vaccine, or you're not going to be in a work environment where everyone isn't vaccinated, wherever you stand, if you feel really strongly about it, you can bring it up, right? You can bring it up, but do it professionally and respectfully with curiosity to gauge, is this the kind of organization that you want to be part of, right? Because the hiring process is also a decision on your part and for you to learn about the organization. So on the job, we want to be careful that we follow your organization's regulations, address any issues with management. We do not talk about vaccination status, whether someone had COVID amongst employees, and respect that reopening is not a celebration for everyone. People have varied views on it. Don't ask anyone about their COVID or vaccination status. This is a confidential health matter. You can talk with HR, with whoever hired you if you had that conversation, but these are private conversations behind closed doors, right? We do not want to seem that we're discriminating, harassing, make anybody feel bad whether or not they were vaccinated or whether or not they had COVID, right? Don't tell anyone else about your vaccination status, right? Or who had COVID. These are confidential. If you're in leadership, right, we don't want to talk about medical status. These are confidential and protected conversations. If your organization is big enough to have an HR department, let HR handle these kind of conversations. Get guidance from upper leadership. Track the conversations that you have and get input. Do remind employees not to talk about COVID cases or vaccination status. Use the same language about COVID restrictions as your HR function. And that may change. And don't go around saying, oh my God, they're changing all the time. Because guess what? These directions are coming from places like OSHA or the CDC or the Department of Labor, and they are changing. I've had labor law attorneys. One day I saw the labor law attorney present a 2-hour presentation on this topic. The next day, the same 2-hour presentation said, you know what, in 24 hours, the guidance has changed. So this is important. The next thing, get professional HR advice if employees refuse to comply with the organization's COVID restrictions. You should not handle this on your own. Don't ask anyone about their COVID vaccination status, particularly job applicants. Follow the guidance of HR. Don't tell anyone about somebody else's vaccination status or who has COVID, and don't handle these issues on your own. You need guidance. It's a challenging legal landscape for organizations. Okay, so what does the workplace look like now? A couple of things. I think masks are really here to stay, right? Maybe not every day, or maybe sometimes, and then things will get better, then we'll put them on again. But one thing I think that we've learned is that we've seen a great decrease in flu and common cold, and that wearing a mask can help keep other people from getting sick. So wear a mask when you're directed to, wear a mask when you feel ill. I would advise, even if you're at home and you have other people in your household, if you're getting the sniffles, put a mask on. It's not the end of the world. We've just lived through it. It doesn't change things. It's the courteous thing to do. And stay home if you're not feeling well. I know I was one who was powered through it. I'm feeling sick, but I'm here at work like a badge of honor. It's not a badge of honor anymore. If you feel sick, stay home. And sick leave has gotten more generous through this pandemic, and that's what it's for. A couple of other things. Video conference, remote work technologies, guess what? They're here to stay. All of us have learned a lot about the benefits of technology, and they will continue to be used in the workplace from now on. So, but this picture is a little bit problematic. The best practice is that if one person is alone on a screen, then all people should be alone on a screen to level out the playing field. So for example, these workers should all be in their office, even though their offices are next door to one another, right? It's a different way of presenting virtually. And so we're going to see some of that. So you need to develop your camera-ready professional attire and computer setup. We're going to see less office space and more hotel workspaces where employees might work from home 3 days a week, in the office 2 days a week, without an assigned office or cubicle. But this creates different dynamics. And these are some quotes from some professionals. This is from Zillow. They say the company plans for its all hands meetings, which used to take place in Seattle live, to continue to be hosted virtually to save money, and for nearly all of its training and development programs to remain online. Employees will no longer have assigned seats in the office, and office time will be centered on less frequent, more intentional, more impactful gatherings. So another quote is, this is from a researcher who's written extensively on the workforce. Informal interactions can be orchestrated even in remote settings, and they have effects on career outcomes. So what does this mean for us? A couple of things. Competition for jobs and job promotion may be global. You need to manage your corridor reputation in a different way. And you need to find ways to expose yourself to the powers that be in the organization. Just because you're remote doesn't mean you have to be disconnected. So the new normal is being created and defined, and the goal is that we create something better. But it's going to take us to interact in different ways and to be respectful of the need for organizations to put the health and safety of everyone at the forefront. And I think these are things that are going to stick going forward. So with that, I want to say thank you, and I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you so much. I hope you learned something today, and good luck. Please stay safe. Wear your mask, don't get COVID, and keep yourself and your family well, and whatever you think is the best practice for you. But know that in the workplace, it's a challenging time, but an opportunity to create something that is going to be the new normal. So best of luck to you all. Bye.